Hi there, another cold and rainy day in Sydney. It's like yesterday on repeat, so I'm not going anywhere. This is the kind of weather we should be just making and eating soup all day, honestly. Um, I wanted to talk in this video about my journeys, and I say in plural, through therapy. Um, it was a very patchwork kind of process, and it didn't just involve individual therapists, it also involved fronting up to particular kinds of social services, especially in 1990s Melbourne. So, those of you who are kind of in my age group, excuse me, and familiar with the milieu of those days will probably relate. But anyway, just a few content warnings. I mention SA by necessity because a lot of what I had to work on therapeutically had to do with that. So anyway, like picture this. I am probably 20 by now, 21. Basically I fled Perth, Western Australia uh, in 1992. But I'd already moved out of the home environment earlier. So I disclosed what had happened to me around the age of 1920, um, which is a bit atypical for those assigned male at birth to report in this way. But lots of stuff was coming up for me, and I just disclosed at the same time as wanting to be out about my sexuality, or at least how I understood it then. I got at least the earshot of my mum, and also my siblings were not at all, well, they still are not homo or transphobic. Um, it's many years later, but anyway, the social idioms of the time, especially around CSA, and for those of us assigned M at birth, it was very hard for people to grapple with. I mean, obviously, on a psychological and emotional level, for anyone it is, even now. Um, it's not that I wasn't believed or in some way morally supported then, but I wasn't led into any kind of process of reporting or specifically seeking um, psychological support services in Perth. It was just more like horror, I guess. Um, not, not shaming me, but more of the ilk of like, this is awful. I condemn that. Like, I think I can remember my mum even saying that, but there was no action taken, and there was no assumption, or seemingly, this is me thinking about it, that I would need ongoing support, as if the act of disclosure itself was enough. It took me a lot to do that, but so I kind of got a sense that there was a kind of fault line there, or a cleavage between me and others, and that the onus was then on me as someone that was seemingly strong or angry, or who knows. Maybe the perception of being male kind of minimized the idea that I was seriously struggling with it, or that I could be seriously struggling with it. Because back then, people tended to think about SA and CSA only in terms of male perpetrators and female victims. And why do I say that? Because even in social services, that was true. When I ended up in Melbourne, because I was really fleeing the fallout of the twin disclosures between saying that I wasn't heterosexual and saying I was abused. Um, so I just wanted to get out, and I just was in such shell shock. But I approached Casa House, so that's the Centre Against Sexual Assault. They used to be based in kind of in the CBD, and probably because of that lens on gender violence, gender based violence, they really found it hard to direct me to anywhere. And back then they had a very kind of feminist analysis. I don't know if I'd call it radical feminist, but a particular kind of feminist optics. Obviously, there are different varieties of feminism on SV, and when it came to CSA as well. And this is where the phrase violence against women and girls kind of consolidated. There's even some organizations that still use that, but they've tried to extend and include trans and non binary people as well. But back in the 90s, that wasn't at play, and I was referred to quote unquote a male survivor group for group therapy, and oh god, that was such a mess. I was the youngest person there by miles, by light years, and people wanted to be my mates. I couldn't relate to them very much, and also some of the older men came and hugged me, and that made me feel really, really uncomfortable. So I stopped going. It was very structureless as well. With it was well-meaning probably, but really much like those men sheds type things, talking about your masculinity, and don't really have that as an issue. So I was a real fish out of water, and I felt really alone, and I stopped going. Um, I think in gay circles as well, no one ever talked about these things. LGBT in general. No, it's the negative affect. You know what I mean? That Cameron Awkward Rich would talk about, and Hill Malatino, who are both trans mass scholars. So, at any rate, knowledge about how LGBTQI people are affected by these things was not as not as prominent, even though it's still overshadowed today by sort of mainframes about these things. But you know, our populations are much more affected by these forms of violence, which are also gender-based violence. So I started to engage with therapy on an individual basis, trying to do the research myself and find out mental health care plans didn't exist then. So you had to pay out of pocket. What would be the best fit? And I started to work with a radical feminist therapist who took me under her wing and didn't really have clients like me, but we did a lot of inner child work. And anyway, she had her offices above Shrew Bookshop in Melbourne, which was the women's feminist bookshop that unfortunately closed. But it was a great place, really great resources for these things. But I was still a bit of a fish out of water, perceived as an effeminate gay male. Um, it was really great to have that support from her. She was of German background, and she was really committed to the whole process. So it gave me the first kind of language and set of tools to begin to work on trauma, really, even though that wasn't the language we used. It was definitely much more around CSA, and I could be really open with her. So I do owe a debt to radical feminism. I always have thought certain strands of radical feminism are really on point, especially around issues of gender-based violence and many other things, actually. But anyway, moving on from that, the rest of it, well, it was hard to sustain because I couldn't afford it, and I still, I still engaged with this therapy in a child work, but I couldn't really afford it, and so I ended up cleaning my therapist's offices and home a little bit now and then instead of making a payment because we're trying to put our therapeutic process first. But at some point, I must have broken off. I did it for quite a few sessions though. Maybe I felt like I was kind of at a better baseline at that point. But things weren't easy. They were still rocky, and not long after that, I also sought out the services of a Jungian therapist, and we worked a lot on archetypes, especially about the family background. And she was also a lesbian. Um, I remember her and the other person's names, but I'm not going to mention them because, this is discretion. Um, yeah. So I went and saw her a good while, and she was very vindicating as well. But I really think that the therapy needed to go into a different modality. And as such, when I've seen therapists over the years, some of the modalities have been partially useful or have tried to push me into the present rather than looking at the past.